vinyl community, welcome back to another episode of RB's Vinyl Corner. Today I'm going to do a ranking video of the Golden Earring 1980s albums. Something I never done before. I didn't do ranking albums before, basically because I actually am not really fond of lists, picking favorites, those kinds. And the reason why, especially for example with like a top list, like my number one, number two, number three, because it's a subject of change. If you make like a top 5 or a top 10 out of 20, 30 or 40 records, you're basically saying that the one that didn't make that top 10 isn't worth being in that top 10. And that often is not the case, or it's not true. Because sometimes the number 11 or number 12 can be as good as the number 5 or the number 6, and it's sometimes also an object of or a subject of change. What could be my number one record at this very moment might not be next week or next month or next year. Sometimes we have like these albums or records that need to grow in time. They're gonna not being love at first sight, but after a couple of listenings or maybe even years after its release, it will suddenly hit you in a way it didn't before and will become a favorite. One of a very good example I'm going to show you in this video, because shortly ago I had a certain opinion about a certain album, and that opinion changed completely within the last couple of days when I was giving this a very extensive listening. So it's just an example of how your own opinion also changes throughout the time. So the records that I did not include in this ranking are the live albums and the compilation albums. So the live albums, they basically released 2 live albums in the 80s. Early in the 80s, 1981, they released Second Live. Very energetic album, but because it's a live album, I do not let it take part in the ranking. And the same counts for the other live album that came out in 1984, which is called Something Heavy Going Down, live from the Twilight Zone. Pretty interesting record, by the way, but because it's a live album, I'm not going to let it take part in the ranking. So we're going to focus only on the studio albums. All right, so here we go. My number 5, The Hole. My least favorite Golden Earring album of the 80s, and I actually dare to say it's my least favorite Golden Earring album of all. Does it mean that it's a bad album? Not necessarily. It's just not a Golden Earring album like you used to from this band. And the reason why, opinions obviously are diverse here, but the point is the producer of this album wanted to aim for an AOR sound, which was so famous in the mid-80s, that bands like Foreigner, Whitesnake scoring big major hits with a specific AOR sound. And they wanted to aim for that. And to be honest, and to be very truthful, it didn't work out. The producer actually killed this album by overproducing or overproduction. There are some nice songs on this one. I think the opening track, They Dance, is pretty interesting, especially with the use of the saxophones. And also the hit single of this one is Quiet Eyes, which is a pretty good song, but basically that's it. Not my favorite Golden Earring album. Maybe my opinion will change in the next coming years, I don't know. It never did so far, and I actually don't expect it will. Number 5, The Hole. Alright, my number 4 might actually be pretty surprising, because it's actually a very important record in the Golden Earring discography. It's Cut. So some little history lesson here. Cut was actually the album that basically saved the Golden Earring's asses. In the early 80s, their popularity really diminished, and also record sales went down completely, and they had a massive debt, like a tax debt. So when the first album of the 80s, which is Prisoner of the Night, and also the live album I just showed you, failed in success and failed in sales, Golden Earring were actually planning to give it a quit. So by planning that, they came together and went like, let's make one more final goodbye studio album. And the story goes that George Cormans, which is one of the singers and the guitarist, was already working on some material for a solo album. and one of the songs was Twilight Zone. And they used that one to make it a Golden Earring song and put it on this album. And when this album came out, the Twilight Zone became a massive hit. And the whole album became like a massive hit album. And it's basically saved their asses because the success of this album actually made them continue their career. And also, this was the start of a massive sound change and change in their whole performing. There are some very good songs on this one. It has The Devil Made Me Do It, which is a really nice song. It has a Future, really dynamic, and it has Twilight Zone. But personally to me, that's also where it ends with the standout songs. The other songs are okay-ish, but are really not like hit material. They are like, it feels like album fillers to me. Baby Dynamite, Last of the Mohicans, Lost and Found, pretty okay, but I actually liked the acoustic version years later on Naked 3 a little bit more. Charging Up My Batteries and Secrets, not really very, very good songs. But it were The Devil Made Me Do It and Twilight Zone that really saved their asses. So my number 4, Cut. Now let's go to my number 3, and here's what I was talking about. This is a surprising turn of events for me, because this was one of the albums, together with The Hole, I actually considered their worst. And I'm talking about Keeper of the Flame. This went from number 4 to number 3 in my book over the last course of days. The album was the last album they did in the 1980s. It came out in 1989, and it was preceded by a single called My Killer, My Shadow, which is not included on this album. And the song was actually meant to be part of a movie soundtrack for a movie which is called Amsterdam. But it didn't make the movie either. The album actually has also a lot of production, and there were a lot of issues going on with the drum parts, and story goes that all the drum parts were actually a drum computer, and the drummer Cesar Zuiderwijk was hardly involved in the recording of this album, and it almost led him to leave the band. Fortunately, he didn't. So there's a lot of things going around with this album. But listening to this album the last couple of days, it's actually pretty okay. It's pretty good. It opens with Can't Do That, which is a very nice song, which is a little bit strange. It has some jazzy interlude in the middle of the song. It has Barry Hay basically talking his way through the song, so it's a pretty interesting song. But it really kicks in with the second song, which is Too Much Woman, which is a really kick-ass rocking song. There's a lot of guitar involved in this album, way more than the previous album, which was The Hole, which I just showed you. So it's actually a pretty rocking album. The second single they pulled from this album, the first one was, by the way, was Turn the World Around, which was a minor hit. But the second one they pulled out here was Distant Love, which is a ballad. It's a beautiful song, but it didn't really make it in the charts. In my opinion, they should have chosen for the third song on this album, which is called One Word. Beautiful song with a great interaction between Barry Hay and George Kooijmans. It's actually a great song. Actually, Circles and Save My Prayer could be considered the fillers of this album. But the closing song, Distant Love, again, is a great song. So 8 songs on this album. There are 2 more songs included on the CD version of this, which is Nighthawks, which I completely don't like. And then the aforementioned single, My Killer, My Shadow, which is one of the songs I actually do like. So I changed my opinion about this album after listening to it a couple of times the last couple of days, and it actually pulled it forward to number 3 in my top 5 of the 80s albums. Keeper of the Flame. So now we're going to go to number 2, which is actually the first album they released in the 80s. This was released in 1980. It's a great rock and roll album. Unfortunately, it didn't do much in the charts, but I kind of like this album. It really grew on me. It opens with the hit single Long Blonde Animal, which they still play today in every concert they do. That has No For an Answer, great song. My Town, really great rock and roll song. Prisoner of the Night, I love it. I Don't Want to Be Nobody Else, great song. Cut them down to size. It's a little bit more like a filler of this album, but Will of Mercy, with great vocals by George Corman. It's a real George Corman song on this album. Great song. And then Coming Out of Space and Going Crazy Again. Kind of like fillers, but overall the sound and the songs in this one, I totally dig it. So therefore it became my number 2, Prisoner of the Night. Great album. And that brings us to the last one. It could only be one. It's n.e.w.s, News. Great album from start to finish. This is one of those albums that has absolutely no filler. Each and every song on this album is great. Even the title track, which is like a strange song, a really groovy, really funky, but even that one I really, really like. If there is one song on this album that might get in that category of fillers, it should be Fist and Glove. But other than that, this album has great songs. It opens with Clear Night Moonlight, very nice rocking song. When the Lady Smiles, the big smash hit from this album. Enough is Enough, Fist and Glove, which concludes side A. News on side 2, and I'll Make It All Up to You. I love that song. The guitar parts and the guitar intro, one of the best songs of the Golden Earring overall. Mission Impossible, what can I say about that song? Great, great song. Really rocking. And then it closes with a George Corman song, It's Over Now, which I also really, really like. This is one of the albums I think in my lifetime I played the most of the Golden Earring. Other than The Naked Truth, one of my most favorite Golden Earring albums ever. So North, East, West, South, n.e.w.s, News, Golden Earring, my number 1 in ranking the 80s albums of the Golden Earring. And that concludes my video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please thumb ups. If you have a different opinion, please leave a comment. I'm also very interested in your ranking of the albums of the 80s, so please leave that in the comments if you want. If you didn't subscribe to my channel yet, please do so. It would be really appreciated. And I see you in the next video. Take care.